All right. I'm Jen Hernandez. I'm CEC's Climate Justice Manager, and I just want to thank you all again for being here to learn more about one of the most significant ways that many of us can reduce our impact on greenhouse gas emissions, the cars we drive. We'll be we'll be covering some of the basics of electric vehicles, EV charging, financial incentives, and rebate programs, and how to get support locally for getting into a clean vehicle. Um, we will also be featuring testimonials of EV drivers, including myself, and we'll be answering as many questions as we can that come up along the way. Thanks in advance to our EV experts, Tracy Ruiz, Nancy Clarin, as well as Cam Gray and Ellen Diaz-Correa, who will be answering your questions in real time in the Q&A. To start us off, I'm going to hand things over to CEC Director of Climate Mitigation, Cameron Gray.
Thank you, Jen. So before I lead us into today's presentation, we're going to do an intro poll so we can better understand your EV knowledge and interests. So you should see those poll questions pop up momentarily. All right, and so the poll questions are, how familiar are you with electric vehicles on a scale of 1 to 5? Do you currently drive an EV? And are you currently considering purchasing or leasing an EV if you do not currently drive an EV? So as you participate in that poll, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization's mission and work, and then we'll pull up the results of that poll once they're ready. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our nonprofit, Community Environmental Council has pioneered environmental solutions on California's Central Coast for more than 50 years. Our work is focused on advancing rapid and equitable solutions to the climate crisis, including ambitious zero carbon goals, the drawdown of excess carbon, and protection against the impacts of climate change. Our mission is to build on-the-ground momentum to reverse the threat of the climate crisis, transform the systems that fuel it, and safeguard communities from its impacts. We believe that together, we can reverse climate change, repair the damage, and protect local communities from extreme weather impacts. So I just really want to thank you all for taking the time to join us here today and for being part of the solution. And so I think the poll results should be ready here soon. Once they are, we can take a look. All right, so it looks like in terms of familiarity, we have a pretty good range, but the largest group of folks with us today are kind of in the middle. They know a bit, maybe not everything that they'd like to know. We have about 25 EV owners with us today, and about 120 folks who do not currently own an EV. And we have about half of the people in the webinar with us who are in the market for a new electric vehicle. And other folks who aren't there yet, they're just here to learn, or other folks who know that their next car will be an EV. So thank you so much for helping us get to know you better today. And the information you shared will also help us share out relevant resources after the webinar. So appreciate you participating in the poll. All right, and so I think with that, I can lead us into the presentation for today. So let's get those slides up. All right, so why does driving electric matter? If you don't have the answer to that question, what I want to talk with you about today, or sorry, actually, I skipped ahead. We're going to go over the outline for the presentation. So first, I'm going to talk about why EVs matter. Then we're going to go over the current market and some of the challenges that people are facing today. After I cover those first two topics, I'm going to hand it off to Jen. She's going to walk us through the fundamentals of EVs, the vehicle options that are available today, as well as how EV charging works. And she'll also provide an overview of the incentives. So with that, we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So why does driving electric matter? Well, if you have to drive, switching to an electric vehicle is likely to be the single most impactful action you can take to reduce carbon emissions. which will help us prevent further impacts from climate change and ensure that future generations inherit a livable planet. The carbon emissions from an EV that is using California's clean electricity as fuel are about 75% to 100% lower than the carbon emissions from a comparable vehicle that uses gasoline or diesel as fuel. Our electricity is also getting cleaner and cleaner each year, and our region is very fortunate to have several community choice energy programs, including Santa Barbara Clean Energy, the Clean Power Alliance, and Central Coast Community Energy. These community choice energy programs are helping us accelerate our transition to 100% renewable electricity, and they're offering that electricity at rates that are lower than SoCal Edison and PG&E. So another reason why EVs matter and why we want to transition into them is that they provide significant community health benefits and they improve overall quality of life. All electric vehicles produce zero tailpipe emissions, which means that there is no pollution in the air we breathe being created by those vehicles. And by transitioning away from oil and gas, EVs also help us protect our water and our communities from the harmful impacts of oil and gas extraction. And if those reasons weren't compelling enough, there are lots of financial benefits to electric vehicles. They have a lower total cost of ownership, with EV drivers paying about half as much to repair and maintain their vehicles. And they also are going to provide a much more affordable fuel option because electricity is about a third to half the cost of gasoline. And beyond that, EVs are just a lot of fun to drive. They have fast acceleration and they provide benefits like one pedal driving because of the regenerative braking, where you take your foot off the pedal, the EV is going to just brake itself. So I think with that, we can go to the next slide and I can tell you a bit more about the vehicles that are available today, or at least just the number of them. So we have lots of different options available for electric vehicles. There are over 80 EVs on the market today. So at this point, an EV is out there for almost every person, regardless of their lifestyle or their transportation needs. And the options include a wide range of vehicle types, including sedans, hatchbacks, SUVs, and all-electric trucks. We can go to the next slide. There's also been incredibly strong growth in the EV market. You might have noticed this just driving around. There are more and more electric vehicles on the road. And right now we are on pace to have another record year in EV sales here in the state of California, and also in the United States. You can go to the next slide, please. All right. So with this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the barriers and the concerns that we want to help people address during this webinar today. So these concerns are going to vary person to person, but there's one overarching concern that we really focus on. It's social, economic, and environmental inequity. So these inequities present the largest systemic barriers to EV adoption, and they compound all the other challenges that a person may face during their journey into an electric vehicle. Some of these other challenges include limited access to charging, especially for renters, charging deserts in some communities where people don't have access to public charging stations, financial barriers that can make it difficult for people to surmount the upfront cost of buying an EV. And there's also limited vehicle availability that we've seen with the pandemic and supply chain disruptions. And then one other concern that we've heard about is grid reliability. Some of these concerns are overblown, or they're not really founded in fact. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more today and also share some of the things that we're doing to help increase grid reliability and the reliability of EV charging. So this webinar, as I mentioned earlier, is part of what we're doing to help people overcome these barriers, but we're also working on several other fronts. Some of the other efforts that are underway include providing increased support for low to moderate income households who want to get an electric vehicle. We're doing policy advocacy to increase charging access, and we're making it easier for people to apply for all the incentives that they're likely to be eligible for through our partnership with Access Clean California, who you'll hear from later today. And then I think with that, I want to just encourage folks to add any questions you have about these barriers or common concerns to the chat. We can address those in the chat or in our question and answer session later today. And what you share will also help us send out resources that are most relevant to your specific interests and questions after the webinar. So I want to thank you all again for being here. I'm going to pass it back to Jen so she can take us into her presentation about the fundamentals of EVs.
Thank you, Cam. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah, and apologies for some of the difficulties with the chat. It is working now, so please introduce yourselves, add questions, comments, etc. All right. Well, Cam, that was a great framing for the discussion today about why EVs are such an important piece of our climate and environmental justice work, and why we're working to bring this information and guidance to people. I am going to do a little bit of EV 101, share a bit more about the types of EVs on the market today, how charging works when you're in an EV, and then we will get to some Q&A. So what is an EV? An EV is a vehicle that has a motor that's powered in full or in part by a battery that is fueled or charged by electricity and can either plug into charge or it will work with a gas engine together. Next slide, please. The three main types of electric vehicles that we're talking about today are battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and traditional hybrids. So a battery electric vehicle does not use any gasoline. They're powered only by a battery that's fueled by being plugged into a source of electricity at home, at work, or at a public charger. They produce zero tailpipe emissions, and as Cam mentioned earlier, they're very easy to maintain, largely due to the fact that they have fewer moving parts and fluids to change. They don't require an oil change like gas-powered cars do, and even the brakes tend to last longer. Let's see, most newer BEVs or battery electric vehicles have a range of anywhere from 240 to over 300 miles, which is the distance that you could travel on a full charge. Plug-in hybrid vehicles use both gas and electricity to fuel the motor, and you can choose between electric only or gas only driving as it suits your needs or preference. And these vehicles have smaller batteries, but they still plug into charge. With an average battery range of 20 to 40 miles per charge, it can be possible for most or all of your daily driving, say to school or errands or work, to be powered by the battery, with the gas engine serving as a backup for longer trips. The traditional hybrid vehicles combine a fuel-efficient internal combustion engine with an electric motor system. These cars don't plug into charge. Gasoline is still the main source of power, and you can't toggle between electric and gas-powered driving. But for drivers who want to reduce their emissions and maybe don't have access to charging, this can still be an option. Next slide, please. All right, so there are so many vehicles available today with various battery ranges and at different price points that can meet a variety of transportation needs. Here we see some examples of used EVs. The market for used EVs starts at around roughly $10,000. Here you see a Ford Fiat 500e with a 87-mile range. We have a e-Golf, we have a Nissan Leaf, and a Ford Focus Electric, and all of those have around 100 miles of range. Next slide. There are also a lot of plug-in hybrid EVs available on the used market, starting at around $12,000. Here we see the Chevy Volt that has a 53-mile range. I did see a question in the chat. They don't make the Volt anymore. There is a lot of availability of the Volt on the used EV market, But there are also a lot of other similar vehicles that have a similarly sized battery in combination with a gas engine. So here we have a Hyundai Ioniq and a Ford Fusion Energy, both with about over 20 miles of battery range. And then we have a Honda Clarity plug-in hybrid that has a 48-mile battery range. Next slide. So new EVs and plug-in hybrids start at around $30,000. The red van shown here is a Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid. It's a really popular family vehicle. The gray car is a Hyundai Kona. The white is a Kia Niro. Both have a full battery or plug-in hybrid option. And then we have a Nissan Leaf here. Next slide. And then, of course, there are quite a variety of new EVs coming out that are larger in size. We have the versions of some popular gas-powered models. So we have the Ford Mustang Mach-E, we have a Volvo Polestar, the Rivian, and the Ford F-150 Lightning. All right, next slide. Thank you. So now I'm going to cover the basics of EV charging, and then we'll pause for questions. So keep putting them in the chat. The biggest affordability factor with EVs is the cost of fuel. So whether you're charging at home or at publicly accessible chargers, fueling an EV can cost, like Cam said, half as much as a gas-powered car. So the image on the lower half of the screen is a sticker that you'll see in the windows of most vehicles in a car lot. It shows the fuel efficiency of the car. And for electric vehicles, there's a miles per gallon equivalent, which is basically the distance that you can travel with the same amount of electric energy as a gallon of gas. Next slide, please. So generally, EV charging is talked about in 3 levels, from the slowest time to charge to the fastest time to charge. Plug-in electric vehicles come with a cord that you can use to charge the car by plugging it into any standard 110 outlet that can be found at your home, like in your garage. And this will get you a level 1 charge, which is the slowest at around 3 to 5 miles per hour. But if your daily driving is under 30 to 40 miles per day, and you have a place to plug in for a chunk of time, ideally overnight when the cost of electricity is lowest, this would be sufficient, or could be sufficient, to meet your needs. And you wouldn't need to purchase any other equipment to charge your car. Level 2 is the next fastest, at around 20 to 30 miles per hour of charging. At home, you can install a charger wherever there's a standard 220 volt outlet, like where you'd plug in a washer or a dryer. And this is the rate at which many public or workplace charging stations would fuel vehicles as well. So they're convenient when you have an hour or 2 of errands to run, or you're parking your car all day while you're at work, or if you need a more complete overnight home charge to meet your daily driving needs. So shown here are a few examples. There's a home charging station, and these are some local options. One of them is a free public charger in Guadalupe, and the other is a public charger in Fillmore. Next slide. All right, so level 3 or DC fast charging will get you anywhere from 60 to 200 miles in about an hour. And this type of infrastructure is generally found in public places like shopping centers and along freeways or highways, or it's not something that you would install in your home. These charge very quickly, and they're the option that you'd rely on as well if you're traveling a long distance. Let's see, and this slide shows another local fast charger option. We have the Camarillo outlets and at the Esplanade in Oxnard. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when you charge can be just as important as how and where you charge. And generally, you can charge most affordably at home when energy prices are lowest. The graphic here is something you'd see on your utility bill. It lets you know which times of day are the cheapest to charge. And those off-peak times when energy demand is low. There are special rates that most utilities offer that are made specifically for EV drivers. And can we go back to the slide before? And if you look at the example that was on the previous screen, if you see that it's 22 cents per kilowatt hour that you're paying for electricity, it's roughly the equivalent of $2 per gallon to fuel your car with electricity. Well, you saw a preview. There was a map, looked maybe like a Google map, but for EV charging stations. One of the best resources for locating chargers and planning your travel accordingly is PlugShare. It's kind of like Google Maps, but for EV chargers. Hopefully that'll come back on the screen in just a moment. This resource is available on the web or as an app on your phone, and it's completely free to use. Around SLO, Santa Barbara and Ventura counties, there are over 2,000 publicly accessible charging stations, and close to 300 of those are fast chargers. And the network is growing every day. Just within the last year in Ventura County, we've seen the Electrify America chargers pop up at the mall, at the collection. Union banks are starting to install chargers at all of their locations. So they are ramping up the network there. Most public EV chargers will have options to pay with a credit card or a debit card on site, and they'll offer an app or a scan card as other payment options as well. All right, I think, yeah, maybe we can pause here and use this opportunity to bring Kim back and answer a few questions while we get the slides back on the screen.
Really appreciating all the questions in the chat. There's one question that we got about grid reliability and that being a major concern. So this is also posted as an answer in the chat, but I wanted to lift it up because it's a concern that I've heard a lot about, especially in the last week and a half while we've been out in the community doing National Drive Electric Week events. So today, the impact of electric cars and trucks on the electricity grid is small, and there's actually enough excess capacity to handle rapid growth of plug-in electric vehicles. The notion that the power grid can't handle electric cars and trucks is actually largely driven by fossil fuel funded interests. And so we're working hard to dispel some of the misinformation out there about this. And there's a great article which we can share out after the webinar that will go into more detail about this. But right now, I just really wanted to lift up that a lot of the concerns, though valid given heat waves and other impacts that we've experienced, they aren't as big. It's not as large of an issue as many people might think. And there are also lots of emerging technologies out there that will help people have access to reliable charging, even when the grid goes down. Most of those technologies are combining battery storage with electric vehicle charging stations so that they have a backup power source that they can draw upon during a grid outage.
I see a question about the candle to grave emissions for EVs versus gas vehicles. I think another resource that we can share after is a really great report that the Union of Concerned Scientists did that showed there are differences from, extraction to production to manufacturing and your daily driving to the end of the life of the vehicle between a gas and battery. But overall, battery electric vehicles are still the least polluting. I also saw some questions about batteries being, wondering whether batteries are causing environmental degradation. And I think that the batteries that are used in EVs are recycled. They're recyclable. They're building infrastructure, globally and in the US to continue doing that. I think the afterlife sort of a EV battery after it doesn't fuel a car anymore It can go to backup battery storage. And there are a lot of ways that they're extending the lives of the batteries. But like anything, we are thinking about, and we are cognizant of the fact that any extractive industry has to or should be respectful of the communities that they're operating in. And as the infrastructure grows, that's what we'll have to be paying attention to, and making sure that we hold companies accountable to.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's one last question that I saw that I wanted to lift up, which is how can those who live in a place with no charging capabilities have confidence in purchasing an EV? This is one of those topics that it's really critical and to look at. If people lack charging access, there are electric vehicle options like plug-in hybrids that might be a good fit because they provide the all-electric option for the range that vehicle has, but then people have a backup gas-powered engine that's tied in with that, so that if they're running out of charge, they can fall back on that as well. And that's one of the options that I think we really tend to explore with people if they're finding that they don't have good charging access, looking at the plug-in hybrid option, or maybe even a hybrid electric vehicle like a Prius.
All right, maybe we can jump back to the slides now, and thank you for all these questions. We will definitely have a more Q&A at the end, but we're going to take a few more minutes to go over some of the financial incentives that can help lower the cost of electric vehicles, and then we'll hear from our other EV experts. All right, so first up are the federal incentives. This slide is busy. This one is harder to go over all the details of, but I'm going to do my best. So the federal EV tax credit has existed for a while now, but it was recently updated as part of the climate and energy package of the Inflation Reduction Act. So this incentive will continue to be available as a tax credit, which reduces the amount of income tax that you owe at up to $7,500 for a new EV and $4,000 for a used EV. And starting in January of 2024, this credit will be redeemable as a point of sale or a point of purchase rebate, where the dealer will make the credit amount available to the customer in the form of cash or a contribution towards the down payment. There are a number of factors that determine the eligibility and credit amount for any particular vehicle. And those include the battery size, where the minerals were sourced, where the battery components were manufactured, the MSRP of the vehicle, and the buyer's household income. And we have a really great resource that breaks down the timeline and the requirements in detail that we'll be sharing out after the webinar. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there are many more incentives available within the state of California. Our local air pollution control districts will give you $1,000 to retire an older, more polluting vehicle. Our local utilities and community choice energy providers offer rebates on some new and used EV purchases or leases. And through state-funded programs, you can get rebates and down payment assistance, as well as options to work with safe and secure lenders for your financing needs. There are also programs that help you afford e-bikes, that lower the cost of installing EV charging, and that help you cover the cost of the charger itself. Finally, most, if not all, of these incentives offer increased amounts for households of low income. And it would be hard to cover each of these in great detail in the time that we have today. Often the region that you live in, your income, and your vehicle choice will influence the incentive amounts that you're eligible for. And we don't expect you to navigate these alone. We're going to hear now from two different folks about getting the support you need to get into a clean vehicle that fits your lifestyle and budget needs. We'll hear from our partners at Access Clean California and the County of Ventura, who, along with the CEC team, can offer that support. So I am happy to introduce Tracy Ruiz. You can go to the next slide. Tracy is the Outreach Program Manager with Access Clean California.
Thank you, Jen. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Ruiz, pronounced she, her, hers, and I'm the Outreach Program Manager for Access Clean California. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the program and share a little bit of our background, what we do, and how we can help you all connect with programs. Next slide. So again, I wanted to start off with just an overview of Access Clean California, why we do what we do. So if we can go to the next slide, please. We wanted to first start off by sharing, as you all may know, clean transportation is an equity issue. I think Cam touched on this earlier. Tailpipe emissions are a main source of pollution in disadvantaged communities. Lowest income earners spend 4 times the amount of their income on fuel or gasoline. And also there are many equity programs available through the state and also through local utility companies. However, households are still facing major barriers in order to transition or access clean transportation. Next slide, please. So our mission here at Access Clean California is to help people access clean transportation, to prioritize and serve disadvantaged communities who otherwise would not benefit from these programs, to promote transportation equity in these communities, and to create a model for needs-based allocation of program funding, which will ensure that disadvantaged communities, or the communities that are the most harmed by local pollution, are the ones receiving the funding from the state. And lastly, we want to also support applicants through a multi-step process that we've heard is a major barrier in communities transitioning to clean transportation. Next slide, please. So just to give you all a little bit of background on Access Clean California, where we came from. So actually, Access Clean California initially started off by being called the One-Stop Shop Pilot Project. And this essentially came from the Clean Energy and Pollution Reduction Act of 2015. The California Air Resources Board was instructed to conduct a barrier study on the barriers that were preventing disadvantaged or low-income communities from transitioning to clean transportation. Next slide. So the California Air Resources Board conducted the study and identified 4 key barriers that were the main barriers preventing folks from transitioning. The first one being community and physical, so access to infrastructure for clean transportation in communities. The second being investment, so lack of stable funding in these communities around clean transportation, whether that be for EV incentives themselves or for shared mobility as well. And the third barrier was awareness. Like I mentioned earlier, there are different types of programs, both from the state, from local utility companies, and it's really hard to navigate and understand what programs folks are eligible for. And then the last barrier that came up was affordability. Transportation is expensive, especially clean transportation as well. So making sure that the incentives that folks qualify for are in the forefront and they're aware that these benefits exist to reduce their cost of transitioning to clean transportation. So Access Clean California was designed to help overcome these barriers, mainly focusing on the awareness piece through what we call our outreach partner network, but also addressing the other barriers as we conduct outreach and education in the state. Next slide. So Access Clean California is making it easier for people to access the state's clean transportation and clean energy equity programs in one centralized location. That includes EV incentives, charging infrastructure, transit vouchers, shared mobility, solar, and also e-bikes. Next slide. So in order to tackle the barriers that we mentioned earlier, we have developed 2 key strategies. The first one being coordinated outreach for equity programs through our outreach partner network. And this is a network of different types of organizations statewide that are conducting on-the-ground outreach to bring awareness and education about the different programs. The second being a streamlined user-centered application process, which we call the Benefits Finder, and which I will go over in a little bit that you will have access to as well. Next slide. So how do we connect communities to programs? Next slide. So like I mentioned earlier, we have developed a robust network of partnerships throughout the state of California. And we work with a diverse group of organizations that are on the ground providing education and outreach, for example, through these types of workshops, through social media, through in-person gatherings, post-pandemic, kind of. And they are informing the communities of the programs that are available to them. Next slide. As you can see here, Community Environmental Council is one of our climate justice and equity partners focusing in the Ventura region that are able to conduct these types of outreach events and inform folks of the different types of programs and also about EV 101 information around charging, maintenance, and the different types of vehicles that are available. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we have developed a technology product or an eligibility engine that's called the Benefits Finder, where folks are able to access all the programs in one centralized location and also start their applications for multiple programs in this one engine. Next slide. So these are currently the programs that are available through the Benefits Finder. We have both regional and statewide programs integrated into the Benefits Finder, and you're able to start your applications for multiple of these programs in one place. We are also expanding our Benefits Finder to include local utility programs. Over the past couple of years, we started off with just some of the basic, California Air Resources Board incentives, but we're slowly expanding and including now Peninsula Clean Energy EV rebates, and Power EV charging rebates, and hopefully we're hoping to continue to grow this list and continue to work with community choice aggregators as well. Next slide. So how can you all apply for programs through the Access Clean California Benefits Finder? Next slide. So luckily, through our partnership with Community Environmental Council, you can now learn about and apply for these programs at a specific link that we have developed for CEC and the folks that they are outreaching to. So we will actually drop this link in the chat for you all. You can go ahead and click on this link, look through the Benefits Finder, learn about the different programs, different types of EVs, what programs you're eligible for, and start your applications right then and there. Next slide. And again, luckily through our partnership with Community Environmental Council, we also have the CEC team providing some one-on-one support for folks that need assistance to further understand what the programs are that they're eligible for, navigate the website, and if they have any questions around the application process or what EV would be the best fit for them, you can also contact the CEC team, Jen Hernandez, Alan Diaz, or Ana Rico for further assistance, and we'll drop their email addresses in the chat as well. And that is it from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy. Now I'd like to bring on another person who's a great support resource in our region, Nancy Gladden. Nancy serves as the electric vehicle coach for the Ventura County Regional Energy Alliance, and her role supports the implementation of the Ventura County EV Ready Blueprint, which aims to support and accelerate EV and charging infrastructure deployment throughout Ventura County.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, so my name is Nancy Clarin. I work for the Ventura County Regional Energy Alliance that's housed in the Ventura County Sustainability Division. I was hired earlier this year in January as the county EV coach. And the best way for me to explain my role is to say that I'm here to help people find the resources and the answers they need to make a seamless transition from a traditional vehicle to an electric vehicle. And you might just be starting with your research. You're finding all the websites, the blogs, the videos overwhelming and confusing. And you just want to talk to a person one-on-one who can answer your questions and instead of having you jump from website to website. Or maybe you've already done all the research and you still want to fact check, make sure that what you've learned online isn't outdated. So that's what my phone line and my email are open for. Next slide, please. And just to give you an idea of the kind of questions that you can email me or call me with, here are some of the more common questions that I get. What incentives or rebates can help me buy an EV? Aren't EVs more expensive? Will I run out of charge during my commute? Where can I charge? Are EVs safe? And which EV is right for me? And you might have already heard the answers to some of these questions in the previous slides from our presenters. But if you still feel unsure, you want some clarity, you can feel free to shoot me an email after this webinar. Next slide, please. So I'm available to answer questions about your personal vehicle purchase, but also on helping you find access to charging. For example, earlier this year, we had employees from the Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital who had a carpool group that would drive from Ventura County Government Center all the way to Santa Barbara every day. And they wanted to make the switch to an electric vehicle, but they were worried they weren't going to have a place to charge. So they reached out to us, and we were actually able to work with the public charging station provider here at the county, which is ChargePoint, as well as the government center to help get them an overnight parking permit at the government center here. Next slide. So maybe you don't have any questions yet, but you still want to learn a little bit more passively. I would recommend that you sign up for VCREA's Drive Clean newsletter. And I think we're going to get the link to that in the chat. So VCREA started this newsletter earlier this year, and it goes out every couple of months. So we won't spam you, I promise. And in the newsletter, you'll find upcoming EV events, updates on rebates and incentives, action opportunities, and EV news, which could be local, regional, statewide, or national. Next slide, please. And for those of you who want to break from computer monitors, we do have in-person events. So our main form of in-person outreach is tabling at community events like you see on the top right picture there. That was skate night at downtown Oxnard this summer. And we also organize EV shows, EV car shows, where we invite local drivers to come by and talk to the public about their cars. We found that speaking to local drivers is the best way to learn everything you want to know about their specific car, because they're very excited about their cars. And once or twice a year, we'll also hold ride and drive events. And this is where we'll invite local dealers to bring their EVs and offer test rides. So these are events that are a great opportunity for you to see a variety of cars, what's available at your local dealerships, and maybe even find the car that you want to buy. And upcoming, we have on October 12th, we'll be at Gold Coast Transit District tabling there. And then after that, we'll be at the Mixteco Indigena Community Organizing Project community meeting on November 19th. Next slide, please. Yeah, and the last thing I want to say is that we have a public survey that we launched earlier this year. If you have just 3 minutes after this webinar, I encourage you to fill it out. Your answers help me better understand what concerns the community has about electric vehicles and what's stopping people from making the switch. Your answers could also help inform the county on where the public wants to see more chargers. And last slide. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me by email or by phone. I'm available from 9 a.m. to 3:30 Monday through Friday. And if you want to find VCREA's resources online, you can go to that website there, vcenergy.org.
All right, well, now I'm going to introduce my colleague, Alan Diaz-Correa. He's going to share a little bit about his experience using Access Clean California to help him switch to an electric vehicle.
Thank you, Jen. And sorry if there's an echo. I'm in a big building, but yes, my name is Alan Diaz-Correa. I also work for the Community Environmental Council. I have been assisting in some of the bilingual EV education, as well as just answering community members' questions about EVs. But for today, I wanted to talk about just my own path with purchasing an electric vehicle. Both Jen and I utilized the incentives, and I stacked several incentives, and I was able to save over $3,000 for a lease and that was a lease of a Hyundai Kona 2021. So I was able to get that over 1.5 years ago. A little bit about myself, like you can see on the slide. I'm just a house of one plus my small dog. I do have a low to moderate income. And so I was able to qualify for most of these incentives. I was also able to qualify for additional incentives. So if you are under $50,000, there are some rebate programs that can actually double the amount that you can receive. It does depend on the program and again, whether you can qualify. But since I purchased my vehicle, I actually have been relying on public charging. Since I rent a studio, I use a charger that's actually 2 blocks from my house. The city provides that charger, and for me, it's actually free. And so I usually just walk my dog, charge my car for a few hours during the workday, and then I'll pick it up after a few hours. I know Jen mentioned level 1 and level 2 charging. Those are really the chargers that I rely on. If I ever visit my parents, I know that they'll have a level 1 charger that I can plug into, and most of the time my car is parked. As far as kind of how it's helped me, it's really not only helped me save a lot of money, but it's been exciting to be able to stop and kind of learn this new way of planning. For example, a few months ago, I drove to Montana where I went to school. And so it was really exciting to drive my all-electric car basically thousands of miles and try to figure out where to charge in Washington and Oregon and then in Montana. So yeah, I think it really can take you far. I've gotten a lot of support just from my friends, families, and neighbors. Since I've purchased my car, my neighbor purchased an EV. 2 of my cousins purchased their own EVs, actually without telling me. And so there is a huge difference between, just a couple years ago to now. Most people are seeing that EVs are the next option, right? If you have a bike now, if you have a car now, stick with it. That when you need a new car, people are really considering electric vehicles. And so that's why here at CEC, we wanted to make sure that these vehicles are affordable. So there is a lot of incentives out there, but there's also a lot of education that needs to happen, right? I know in this space, most of us probably know someone who is an EV owner. But in my community, these are relatively new. And so just giving a person a chance to see it in person, like you see in the picture, or just to test drive it, that's usually my go-to response is, do you want to drive it? It's really speedy. So yeah, again, I've been answering some of the questions in the chat. Please keep sharing the questions if you have any. And that should be it for me, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, I'm going to take a moment to share my own story. It's similar to Alan's in terms of the type of vehicle and the incentives that I received and the way that I charge my car. But I have a family of 4. These are my kiddos here. We live in an apartment, so we only use public charging stations to charge our vehicle. And I was able to receive around $11,000 in incentives as a low to moderate income household. These were incentives available from the state of California. Some of them are still available today. Others have changed programmatically, but all in all, I was able to get down payment assistance to help me cover the upfront costs of the lease. I was able to get a point of sale rebate that helped cover some of the longer term costs, cover the monthly payments. I was able to get a rebate from the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project that is sent after you lease the vehicle. I was able to use that to help cover monthly costs again, and also like the insurance costs and the fueling costs. And I received a charging incentive from one of the programs that the option was to receive assistance in installing a home charger, which I didn't have available to me. So the other option was a public charging credit for $1,000, which has covered almost 2 years of driving electric. I think I saw a lot of questions about knowing when to charge and considerations for changing your driving habits and can you overcharge? So I think I can share about some of those here as well. I'm definitely the driver who would drive my car until my gas light was on. I can say that I have tried to shift my driving habits, but even still, I've never run out of battery or gotten in a tight situation. In Fillmore, where I live, there is one public charger available. I do run into instances every now and then when the charger is offline. I generally, traveling electric in general requires a little bit of advanced planning. That chargers aren't as available as gas stations. That plug share app that I mentioned earlier is the main way that I find available chargers. And I also just make sure that I have at least enough charge in my car to get in and out of town, or to get to the next charger in case there's an emergency. There are settings on your EV, like you can set it to only charge to a certain level. So, even if overcharging is possible, it's really easy to avoid. And I think that overall driving behaviors are interesting. The regenerative braking is pretty fun. You can watch on your dashboard as you're driving up a hill, and then as you're coming back down, by the time you reach the bottom of the hill, I know for me, sometimes I end up with more electric miles than I started with, which is, you can't do that with a gas car. But yeah, I think part of what we do at CEC is use all of this learning and experience to help other people do the same. So Alan and I are available. We're going to go to some Q&A right now, but we'll be sharing everybody's contact information so you can connect with anybody who spoke on this webinar today to learn more and get some more one-on-one support. All right. So I'm going to have folks jump back on, Nancy, Tracy, Cam, Alan, and we'll go into some Q&A.
All right. Just to kick things off, we had a couple questions in the chat that I was able to answer while Jen and Alan were presenting. One of them was about tax credits. So we got a question from someone about whether or not they could get the full $7,500 tax credit if they purchased a vehicle that's eligible to receive that amount, but then had less tax liability than $7,500. So the answer to that question is that the amount of credit that a person can receive is capped by their tax liability. So if they didn't have tax liability up to that amount, they would not be able to access that full credit that the vehicle was eligible for. That is going to change with new laws and provisions coming into effect from the Inflation Reduction Act. In 2024, there will be a new point of sale transfer option that people can use, where they can transfer the tax credit that they're eligible to receive to the dealership, and the dealership will remove or deduct that amount from the upfront cost of the vehicle at the point of sale. So it basically takes money off the hood, reduces the sticker price of the vehicle at that point in time. So that is going to be a new option that people can leverage then when that law comes into effect in 2024. And if you have more questions about how those tax credits are going to work with the new law that was passed, we'll be sharing more information about that out over the next 3-6 months. All right. Any other panelists want to jump in with questions that they saw?
I see one question in here that's asking if there's a step-by-step guide for buying a vehicle and applying for incentives. I think that's exactly the situation that you should click on the Access Clean California link. We have a unique link that will make sure that the CEC team is able to provide support for you on the other end. But Access Clean California will take you from start to finish. First, learning about the incentives. Some you need to apply for before you purchase, some you would apply for after. They'll help you figure out which vehicle is best for you, which incentives you might qualify for, and the whole process to get you into a vehicle.
And I'm going to answer just one question about, I hear a lot of concerns about battery life, and what if I buy my car and then 5 years later I need to replace the battery. And I think one thing people don't always know is that that your dealership is going to have a warranty on that battery. I believe it's mandated at least 8 years. And as technology improves, the cost of replacing batteries is also getting more inexpensive, and batteries are having a longer and longer lifespan.
Yeah. Oh, go for it.
Thanks, Cam. I wanted to answer a question that came up around having to pay state taxes in order to be eligible for the rebates. There are different types of California incentives available before you purchase a vehicle or after you purchase a vehicle. So we call them basically pre-purchase incentives or post-purchase incentives that you don't have to owe taxes to be eligible for. That would be only applicable for the tax credit.
So I saw some questions about charging station reliability, where stations might be down, they might need to be repaired. So I wanted to follow up on that. There have been issues in the last couple of years with lots of charging stations not being kept up and running. And so the state of California is now building into their programs that provide funding for EV charging stations, new requirements. The California Energy Commission has been leading on this. So they are asking folks who get funding from their programs to keep those stations up and running 97% of the time, has a requirement of receiving that funding. But it also points to a huge need where, as these stations come online, we're going to need to be building a workforce that can keep those stations up and running. And there are a lot of opportunities around green, clean workforce development there, which we can be doing with a focus on equity and having that work happen by and from local companies.
I see a question here about being unsure about when the incentive programs will be open again. And I think I would suggest that so I would suggest signing up at Access Clean California as a way to have your interest in the pipeline and be signed up to receive updates. Each program has its own individual website, but Access Clean California is sort of like the like Tracy said, it's kind of a one-stop shop. So you submitted an application or an interest form there. You will be kind of clued into all the information of the status of all of these incentives. And just to, also want to acknowledge, like, we are in an interesting time for EVs. Like, we've advocated really, really strongly to get more funding for these programs and incentives. And the programs are changing, more funding is coming online. We're also, I think Cam spoke to this earlier, just that is also happening at the same time as we're having supply chain issues, due to the pandemic. And we are doing our best to navigate those. And that is also support that we can provide to folks. Sometimes it's hard to find the vehicles, and that is our intention. That's where we can step in and help everybody figure out how to get into a clean vehicle based on your situation. I think we have time for one more question if anybody else wants to jump in.
Maybe we wrap it up with that. I was going to address what you just brought up about the supply chain issues, which we have heard is a big challenge. I think I did want to add one thing based on a question that I saw earlier, which is how long do we expect those supply chain disruptions to continue? Nobody can exactly predict that, but I've heard lots of experts on the economy and supply chain saying that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe in a year or so, we'll be back to more of a normal supply chain. And so some of those availability issues will go away. But as Jen said, part of what we can do is help people navigate those challenges. And one of the ways we can help, especially, is helping people figure out the vehicle that's right for them. So if they do find it, when it's available, they can move fast because they're confident that that's the vehicle they want to get.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for all your great questions. We'd love if you could share in the chat what you found most valuable from today's webinar, and this will help us shape our future content. We also will do our best to follow up with resources and answers to the questions that we didn't get to. There are a lot, there's so many questions. So yeah, thank you there. We'll also share our contact information in the follow-up email in case you'd like to reach out and speak to any of us directly. In addition, well, I guess on the screen right now, there are a few resources to get you started. Access Clean California, Plug Share, that is the EV charging network finder, and electricforall.org has a lot of really good general information about EVs, available models, etc. We would like to take a moment to ask you to answer 3 more poll questions. They're going to pop up on your screen in just a moment. And they're going to help us understand a little bit more about how this webinar helped you. Should be popping up any moment. All right, and while you're answering, I would just like to share a round of appreciations. If you would like to join me in thanking today's speakers. Our sponsors are Marburg Industries, Santa Barbara City Clean Energy, and Central Coast Cities Climate Coalition, C5. We'd also like to thank our partners at Access Clean California, Electric Drive 805, Grid Alternatives, and the Ventura County Regional Energy Alliance. Well, poll results show that people have learned a lot, which is great. Thank you. And folks are wanting to learn more and get into a clean vehicle. If we can go to, oh, there we go. So here again are our sponsors. It's with support from these and many other partners that we've been able to make so much progress toward a clean energy transition. Some of the other impacts, electric vehicle impacts that CEC has accomplished are events and outreach. We reached over 40,000 people annually with our partners at green car shows and test drives. This webinar is coming on the tail end of National Drive Electric Week, which some of you may have been out to some of our events or EV ride and drive events that we hosted with partners. We work on EV readiness, planning, and implementation across 3 counties and more than 5 cities with Electric Drive 805. We've brought in increased local investment with $12 million in new state investments for 3,000 new charging stations on the South Central Coast. And we've provided community-facing programs and support like this, like our EV 101 EV our one-on-one EV purchase guidance that we've offered to 173 low to moderate income households in partnership with Ecology Action, and community support projects for a rapid and equitable transition to zero emissions transportation beyond EVs. And free events like these are just one of the ways that Community Environmental Council works to advance rapid and equitable solutions to the climate crisis. CEC is one of only a handful of nonprofits in the county of Santa Barbara to hold the highest ratings possible on both Charity Navigator and GuideStar. Next slide, please. You can support CEC's critical work by visiting CECSB.org /donate or scanning the QR code on the screen now. And you can scan the QR code on this slide as well to continue the conversation. We have an Electric Drive 805 Facebook group. You can also look for a follow-up email in the next few days for a recording of the webinar, the presentation, and other resources that we shared today. And you can reach out to CEC and the County of Ventura for one-on-one support. Next slide. All right, and thank you all again for tuning into our CEC webinar series. As we focus on taking bold action putting a stop to climate change and reimagining how we live on our planet. And we hope that today's webinar will inspire you to join us. Thank you. And thank you to all our panelists and attendees.